Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another live stream. My name is Ricky, and today we are gonna be reading some strange but true stories. Uh, I hope you enjoy. If you do, make sure you drop a follow, say hi in my chat, and without further ado, let's jump right into it. Hello, Mia. Okay, so what's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to another video. My name is Ricky. And today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at a strange but true story. This is the story of the Uberlingen midair collision, which took place in 2002. It started with two jetliners colliding with each other, killing, unfortunately, 71 people, and then ended with the murder of an air traffic controller. So, yeah, let's jump right into it. Tears in the Rain, the 2002 Uberlingen midair collision. Hello, October. This is the tail section of Bashkirian Airlines Flight 2937, which lies in a field where it came to rest outside Uberlingen, Germany. It is perhaps one of the saddest stories in the history of commercial aviation. A plane full of Russian Republic's brightest young students, her aspiring artists, musicians, and athletes, ripped so cruelly from the sky, their hopes and dreams scattered across the fields of southern Germany. It is a story of split-second decisions made amid a fog of confusion in the dead of night, which sent two airliners careening into one another at 35,000 feet. It is a story of a tragedy which could have been avoided, and of a man in the throes of grief who sought his own perverted justice in the murder of the air traffic controller he deemed responsible. The tale of the Uberlingen disaster and its aftermath comes across like a modern day Shakespearean drama. But this crime shows also about a fundamental blind spot in the global air traffic control system, a gap whose existence and authorities have failed to close. And it was perhaps a distant echo of the collapse of the USSR, a reminder that the Russian and Western aviation industry still possess divergent impulses, whose untimely intersection could plant the seeds of disaster. Now, 20 years after the accident, long after the closure of its final chapters, we can look back upon the events of the 1st of July 2002 from both perspectives, literary and scientific, can tell the story of a profound human tragedy and the deficient system which made it inevitable. The city of Ufa as it appears today. So, the Russian jet took off from Ufa. That's why this picture is there. Far to the east of Moscow, in the rolling hills and along the margin of the Ural Mountains, lies the city of Ufa, capital of the autonomous Republic of Bashkortostan. I am sure I butchered that pronunciation. Like most of the Russian interior, it fell on hard times during the 1990s, as the collapse of the Soviet Union devastated the local manufacturing industry and plunged thousands into poverty. Even by 2002, as Russia's economy started to turn around, travel opportunities for the people of Ufa were limited. It was therefore quite a cause for celebration when the city's special UNESCO affiliated school announced that its parent agency, I almost said organization there, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, would organize a field trip to a planned UNESCO Youth Festival on Spain's prestigious Costa Dorada. A few dozen of the school's top students were selected, some for their academic prowess, others for their skill in art, music, athletics, and other fields. And I'm gonna take a quick break here and go get some water. Ash, you can edit this out if you want. Okay, I have returned. Where was I? Oh yeah, and other fields. Others bought their way in, and parents of some school children paid several $100s apiece to send their children on the trip, a substantial sum of money, which some could only afford at the expense of their own planned vacations. You know, that is really sad. Imagine paying to send your child on a field trip, only for your child to die on the course of that field trip. Like, that has to suck. The photo appears to show the children in Moscow before their flight to Barcelona. Oh my god. This school trip group, including some 44 children between the ages of 8 and 18, traveled to Moscow on June 29, 2002, when they planned to catch a commercial flight to Barcelona. But their bus driver had accidentally took them to the wrong airport, Moscow having several of them, and they missed the flight. While most travelers could simply go to the check-in counter arranged to board a later flight, the group of 44 kids and 5 adult chaperones would need special accommodations. Stuck in Moscow, when London trip organizers frantically searched for a transportation solution, then children toured the Red Square, the Kremlin, and other national landmarks, snapping photos of each other's smiling faces in front of the high red walls. They could not have known then their unexpected layover in the capital would be the first link in a deadly chain of events that would shock the world. After 2 days in Moscow, the school group received a lucky break. A local airline, having heard of the plight of the kids from Ufa, was able to arrange a charter flight to Barcelona on the night of July 1st. The company in question was Bashkirian Airlines, the de facto flag carrier of the Republic of Bashkortostan. I hate Russian names. Which then split off from a regional Aeroflot subsidiary in 1992, now carried passengers throughout central Russia and to popular holiday destinations abroad, including Barcelona. Between its local connections and its experience with the destination airport, it was ideally positioned to carry out the flight on such notice. What the hell? And so, late on the night of the 1st of July, the kids and their chaperones boarded a Bashkirian Airlines Tupolev Tu-154 at Moscow's Domodedovo International Airport. And for reference, this is what a Tu-154 looks like. That's a Tu-154. Konstantin Kaloyev and his sister Diana before the accident. They were another pair of kids that were on the flight. They were joined by 8 passengers who were not part of the school group but had also missed earlier flights to Barcelona. A family of 4 from Belarus is thought to have been among them. Also on board were Svetlana Kaloyeva and her 2 children, Konstantin, 10, and Diana, 4. And that's these 2 kids who are on their way to visit their father, Vitaly Kaloyev, an architect from. I hate Russian names! Oh my god! Who are on their way to visit their father, Vitaly Kaloyev, an architect from the North Caucasus town of Vladikavkaz, who was working in Barcelona that summer on a vacation home for a Russian oligarch, however the hell you pronounce it. Jesus Christ. Added onto the school group, the 5 other unaffiliated passengers and the 12 crew members, the Kaloyev family brought the total number of people on board to 69. Oh yeah, here's another view of a rush of a Tupolev Tu-154. And this is actually the plane that was involved in the collision. RA 85816. This is the plane's registration number, by the way. So a plane registration number is kind of like a car's license plate, to put it in simple terms. The Tupolev Tu-154 involved in the accident. Saying Russian names are definitely not your best skill at life. Russian names are so fucking difficult to pronounce if you don't speak Russian. But yeah, a plane's registration number is kind of like a car's license plate. Among among what the hell? That's not the word that's there. Although the three-engine Tupolev Tu-154 was designed in the 1960s in the Soviet Union, this particular example that was operating the flight was much newer, having been produced in Russia in 1995, and was equipped with some of the latest technology. Nevertheless, a large cockpit crew was required to fly it. That night, there would be no less than 5 pilots aboard. What they mean is 5 pilots flying the plane, including 52-year-old Captain Alexander Gross, 41-year-old instructor Captain Oleg Grigoriev, the chief pilot at Bashkirian Airlines, who was overseeing Gross as he familiarized himself with the procedures at Barcelona, 50-year-old navigator Sergei Karlov, 37-year-old flight engineer Oleg Valiv, and 41-year-old first officer Murat Ikulov. However, instructor Captain Grigoriev was sitting in the right seat performing the duties of pilot not flying, so First Officer Ikulov simply rode along in the jump seat without being assigned to any specific duties. Also on board were 4 flight attendants and 3 other Bashkirian Airlines employees riding behind as passengers, totaling 12 crew members. And this is the route that Flight 2937 was flying from Moscow to Barcelona, with the location of Zurich Air Traffic Control. All seemed routine as the Bashkirian Tu-154, operating under the flight number BTC 2937, departed Moscow and headed west across Europe, cruising at 36,000 feet. One air traffic control sector gave way to another, and by 23:30 Central European Time, meaning 11:30 p.m. local time, they were over southern Germany, passing overhead Munich. Okay, so quick explanation here. So you have multiple air traffic control facilities along your route, and as you head out of range of one of them, you switch into another, or you tune your radios into another air traffic controller. At that time, anticipating its imminent entrance into neighboring airspace controlled from Zurich, Switzerland, the Munich area controller handed the flight over to his Zurich-based counterpart. That night, a single controller was handling all the airspace within the Zurich air traffic control sector, which is actually something that should is not supposed to be done. There's supposed to be more than one air traffic controller working in a facility, which that is the first link in the chain of disaster. Actually, no. The first link was the children missing the flight. The second, and it's gonna, I cannot English, I swear to God. Okay. So, this is another link in the chain of events. I cannot English today. I don't English very well. Anyways, the facility handled all mid and high level traffic in an area covering northeastern Switzerland and southwestern Germany. You cannot English either, huh, Mia? As well as approach services for aircraft descending into airports in St. Gallen and Friedrichshafen. Tonight, all these duties fell on the shoulders of just one man, Danish-born air traffic controller Peter Nielsen. Normally, this would not be a particularly stressful arrangement. Traffic in this region at this hour was usually light, since all the nearby major airports are closed for the night. leaving only high-level transiting aircraft bound for other parts of Europe. You can't Russian either. I cannot Russian. At the facility, it had become common practice for one or two more. Hi, Furbo. At the facility, it had become common practice for one of the two controllers on duty to take an extended rest in the break room during the middle of the night shift once the last planes had landed at St. Gallen and Friedrichshafen, and tonight was no exception. The other qualified controller left the control room at 23:15, meaning 11:15 p.m. local time, and their assistant left 10 minutes later, leaving only Nielsen and another assistant who is not authorized to control aircraft. And this is the workstation where Peter Nielsen was working that night. For Nielsen, this wasn't an unusual situation, and they anticipated no difficulties controlling the two or three aircraft that were typically in this airspace at this time of night. But on the night of July 1st, there were additional complications. The air traffic control company had recently decided to make modifications to the way it divided the upper level airspace, necessitating several changes to the computer hardware that kept the control center running. Partway through Nielsen's shift, a group of technicians arrived to install the update, and he was informed that his workstation's main computer would have to be shut down, causing his displays to operate in fallback mode. A secondary condition in which several features provided by the main computer became unavailable. In fallback mode, the system, which automatically correlated an aircraft's radar return with its filed flight plan, would not work, forcing him to enter the information manually. Okay, so this is going to require a bit of a technical explanation, so bear with me here. So, hang on, let me see if I can find a good example. Um, okay, so here's a good example. So, all of these little blips on the radar, he requires English. Shut up, Mia. Um, all of these represent planes, and trying to think of the best way to explain this. Um, so in the most basic of terms, the system which tells him what the planes are is only going to work in half mode, meaning he would have to, meaning that instead of the computer updating the information for the flight automatically, he's going to have to update that information manually. That's the best way I can put it without going into a detailed technical explanation, which would probably fly over everybody's head. Where was I? Okay, which will cause him to enter the information manually, and the short-term conflict alert light, which illuminates when the system predicts that two planes will pass too close, would be rendered inoperative. But Nielsen had no idea what features would be lost in fallback mode, nor did he have any obvious way of finding out. And as if that wasn't enough, a few minutes later, the technicians informed him that they would also have to disconnect the control center's direct telephone landline to neighboring centers. The glitches were adding up, but with so few planes in the air, how dangerous could it be? Famous last words, huh? I'll review the traffic situation in the minute before the accident. Friedrichshafen, where the Aeroid A320 wants to land, is circled in red. Here's and these are the two planes that are gonna collide. And you'll find out what that Aeroid A320 is in a minute. But just moments before the Tu-154 entered Zurich airspace, Nielsen faced another complication: an Airbus A320, which is this plane. Um, this is an Airbus A320. An Airbus A320 belonging to the German charter airline Aeroloid contacted Zurich, reporting that their flight had been delayed and that they wanted to perform a late approach to Friedrichshafen Airport. When the second controller went off duty, no one had anticipated that an aircraft would try to land at Friedrichshafen after its normal closing time. So Nielsen was forced to abruptly switch his focus to the approach sector, which normally wouldn't have been his responsibility. It would have been possible to call and wake the second controller, who normally handled approach services, but for just one plane, it didn't seem worth it. Here's another link in the chain of events, by the way. After all, with the Aeroblade plane already lined up for the approach, all Nielsen needed to do was tell Friedrichshafen that it was coming. He picked up the direct landline to the Friedrichshafen control tower, but it had been disconnected. He tried using the regular phone system. It's just disaster after disaster. Definitely. He tried using the regular phone system to call a posted phone number for the tower, but that didn't work either. This was starting to become more complicated than he anticipated. And this is a TCAS. This basically tells you um, whether, so let's say you're a pilot, right? And you're flying a plane. This is a TCAS, traffic collision avoidance system. This basically tells you whether you're on a collision course with another plane or not. Meanwhile, on board the Tu-154, the pilots spotted another plane in the distance, appearing on a situational display their traffic collision avoidance system. The system, or TCAS, incorporates altitude, speed, and heading information broadcasted by the transponders of nearby aircraft. A transponder is basically what tells the air traffic control radar which plane you are of nearby aircraft, compares it to the aircraft's own trajectory, and automatically assesses the relative threat of a collision. If the plane's projected paths come too close, both airplanes' collision avoidance systems will simultaneously issue opposite resolution advisories, telling one plane to climb and the other to descend. But so far, this other plane was still more than 10 nautical miles away, too distant for the system to take such drastic action. And 10 nautical miles is 11.5 miles. Despite this, also let's not talk about the fact that I am being lazy about my computer updates right now. Despite this distance, however, instructor Captain Grigoriev could already see the plane's flashing anti-collision lights blinking against the blackness of the moonless night. Here, visually, he said, pointing out the window. And here, it's showing us zero, he said, referring to the TCAS display where the number representing the height difference between his aircraft and the intruder indicated 0 feet. And this is a DHL Boeing 757-200. In fact, this is a plane that collided with the Tu-154. A9C-DHL, the Boeing 757 involved in the accident. This other plane was in fact DHL Flight 611, a Boeing 757 cargo plane hauling packages from Bergamo, Italy to Brussels, Belgium. And even though they don't say the exact model, I actually know for a fact that this is the Dash 200 freighter model. The flight had departed earlier that day from Bahrain, where DHL has its own local subsidiary airline, and was now on the second leg of its trip after a scheduled cargo swap in Bergamo. So, quick explanation as to what they mean by that. DHL Airlines is actually not, in fact, a single airline, but a group of airlines that are either owned, co-owned, or chartered by the DHL cargo company. That's what they mean by local subsidiary airline. In command were two experienced pilots, 47-year-old Captain Paul Phillips and 34-year-old First Officer Ben Campioni. And they were the only two people aboard, by the way. Although they lived in Bahrain, they were originally from the UK and Canada, respectively, with Captain Phillips being from the UK and First Officer Campioni being from Canada. No one else was on board. Phillips and Campioni had made contact with Nielsen at 23:21, 11:21 p.m. local time, and were cleared 5 minutes later to climb to 36,000 feet in accordance with their flight plan. Unbeknownst to the crew or the controller, this put DHL Flight 611 and Bashkirian Airlines Flight 2937 on course to cross paths at the same time, or, well, I mean, that also works. At the same time, same height above an undefined point near Lake Constance on the Swiss-German border. Now at 23:34 and 24 seconds, 23:34 of course being 11:34 p.m. local time, First Officer Campioni said, "Excuse me, I'll use the facilities," and got up to go to the bathroom. 18 seconds later, an automated voice called out, "Traffic, traffic." Captain Phillips' attention was suddenly drawn to his TCAS display, where he saw an unidentified aircraft approaching from the right at approximately the same altitude. Now let me show you what the 757's TCAS looks like real quick here. So the so the 757's TCAS is right. It's right here on the lower display. And for the Tu-154, their TCAS display would be right about here. Alright, anyways, 18 seconds later, an automated voice called out, "Traffic, traffic." Captain Phillips' attention was suddenly drawn to his TCAS display, where he saw an unidentified aircraft approaching from the right at approximately the same altitude. He watched it attentively, explained to his TCAS resolution advisor. And here's the route of the DHL flight. So they went from Bahrain to Bergamo, and then they were flying onwards to Belgium. And exactly the same moment, the same automated voice called out, "Traffic, traffic," in the cockpit of the Tupolev. "There, fucking traffic," Instructor Captain Grigoriev said. In the control center, Peter Nielsen suddenly noticed that the two planes appeared to be on a collision course. Then short-term conflict alert light would have illuminated 2 minutes ago. But it wasn't working, as we obviously know, and Nielsen had noticed the conflict quite late. He quickly rolled his chair from the approach control station, where he had been speaking to the alloy plate, back to the upper sector station. Leaning into the mic, he contacted the Tupolev and said Bravo Tango Charlie 2937, descend flight level 350, expedite crossing traffic. Bravo Tango Charlie is the call sign for Bashkirian Airlines. And call sign is basically how the plane identifies themselves. Descend, Grigoriev said. The instant he said this, the TCAS computer, detecting an imminent threat or collision, I mean, either one works, right? Issued a resolution advisory, and the robotic voice called out, Climb, climb. Captain Gross was already pushing his yoke forward to descend when First Officer Ikulov, observing from the jump seat, called out, Climb, it says. He's guiding us down, Grigoriev emphatically replied. It was a situation for which they had never been trained. A controller telling them to descend to avoid another aircraft, while TCAS simultaneously instructed them to climb. It would obviously be impossible to comply with both. So which order should they trust? Which took priority? And over here in the West, pilots are trained to completely ignore the air traffic controller and follow their TCAS. So say TCAS tells you to climb, but the ATC is telling you to descend. Oh, like in this situation, you would ignore the air traffic controller if they're telling you to descend, and you're gonna climb. And here's the relative positions of the two planes as they approached each other. So this is where the 757 was, and this is where the Tu-154 was. And at this point in time. Meanwhile, on the Boeing 757, Captain Phillips received an opposite resolution advisory. Descend, descend, the robotic voice called out, and he immediately pushed his yoke forward to reach the target descent rate. The instruction came concurrently with Nielsen's identical instruction on the Tupolev, or to the Tupolev, excuse me, causing him to miss this critical exchange. Both planes were now descending towards each other at a closing speed of 1,300 kilometers per hour, which in miles per hour is going to be 807 miles per hour. So that's the speed at which the planes are closing in on each other. Hearing the sound of the alarms, First Officer Campione hurried back to the cockpit. Glancing out the window, he could clearly see the lights of the Tupolev at approximately their 2 o'clock position. So basically at a 45-degree angle to the right, blinking in the void. Traffic right there, he announced. But it was impossible to tell without any visual reference point whether the plane was above or below them. All they could do was trust the TCAS resolution advisory. But as Flight 611 descended, the projected separation distance between the two planes wasn't changing. Increase descent, the TCAS commanded. Phillips pushed forward on his yoke even harder. And here is communications between the two planes. The radar controller of ACC Zurich repeats the instruction to descend to an expedite descent of to 350. That was a hard sentence to read, even without me failing English, because the first instruction had not been acknowledged. BTC 2937, descend level 350, expedite descent. The crew now immediately acknowledges expedite descent level 350 BTC 2937. And this is the seconds in between the collision. So at 30 seconds, um, this happens. Or 29 seconds. Either way, after that, the radar controller informs the other traffic at flight level 350 in the 2 o'clock position. Yeah, we have traffic at your 2 o'clock position now at 360. And on the 757, the crew receives a TCAS command to increase the descent. Increase descent. The first officer is back in the seat, and at 13 seconds before the collision, the crew reports to ACZ Zurich that they are following a TCAS command that they have initiated descent. TCAS descent. Dillman 600, which Dillman is the call sign for the Bahrain subsidiary of DHL Airlines. Um, I don't know why he said 600. Their flight number is 611. Anyways, Gilman 600 TCAS descent. The crew was and 8 seconds before collision the on the Bashkirian Tu-154 jet, the crew receives a TCAS command to increase the descent, increase climb, and at 21:35:32 they collide. But yeah, this timeline shows just how quickly events unfolded. Communications involving the 757 are on the left, and those involving the Tupolev are on the right. In his control center, Peter Nielsen hadn't received any acknowledgement of his descent or of his instruction to the Tupolev. Bravo Tango Charlie 2937, descend level 350, expedite descent. And I should make a note here because I don't think I made a note. Um, when they say flight level 350, they mean 35,000 feet. Flight level 340, 34,000, and you get the picture. Anyways, expedite descent, level 350, Bravo Tango Charlie 2937. Instructor Captain Grigoriev acknowledged. For the pilots of the Tupolev, this second order removed any doubt about who to obey. Captain Gross immediately pitched down even more, faithfully following the command to expedite. 10 seconds later, Nielsen hurriedly added, "Yeah, you have traffic at your 2 o'clock now, at 360." But from the perspective of the Tupolev, the traffic was not at their 10 o'clock, or the traffic was at their 10 o'clock position, not their 2 o'clock position. And 10 o'clock is basically 45 degrees to the left. "It's going below us," said Navigator Karlov. "Where is it?" Grigoriev asked, peering out the window. "Here on the left side," said First Officer Ikulov. "Increase climb," came the robotic voice of the TCAS. "It says climb," Ikulov repeated, but they kept descending, accelerating through negative 1800 feet per minute. So basically, they're descending at 1800 feet per minute. As the Tupolev pilots frantically worked out what to do, Peter Nielsen, thinking he had ordered the Russian jet out of the harm's way, slid his chair back over to the approach control station, where the aeroid flight was calling him yet again. At his other station, First Officer Campioni on the Boeing 757 could be heard announcing over the radio, "Gilman 600 TCAS descent," but Nielsen never heard him. And here's the CGI animation of the collision. In reality, though, the left wing separated first, followed by the forward fuselage a full 3 seconds later. On board the 757, it suddenly became apparent that the Tupolev, which just a few seconds ago appeared far away, was rapidly closing on their position. "Descend!" First Officer Campioni shouted. "Fuck, descend hard!" At the same moment, the Tupolev pilots saw the Boeing 757 hurtling out of the night, headed straight for them. "Oh shit!" Captain Gross exclaimed, hauling back on his control column and pushing the engines to full power. On the 757, Captain Phillips pushes Yoke all the way to the stop in a desperate attempt to dive, and for a moment, 71 lives hung in the balance. But it was already too late. At 23:35 and 32 seconds, 11:35 p.m. local time, the vertical tail of the 757 slammed into the underside of the Tupolev's left wing as it passed overhead. I told you it was coming from the left, one of the Russian pilots managed to scream over the horrible roar of the impact. And I'm gonna take a guess that that was the first officer saying that, because if we scroll up, um, here he is recorded as saying that the plane was on the left side. Um, Sliced nearly in two by the 757's tail fin, its left wing ripped clean from its root. The Tu-154 began to disintegrate within seconds, spinning itself apart in a great cloud of fire. It rolled rapidly to the left and then the fuselage failed and the plane broke in half, its cockpit and forward cabin folding back and ripping away, with the tail section and the right wing, engulfed in flames, arched like a falling star across the night sky over Lake Constance. And here's a CGI animation of that. On board the 757, the pilots felt a massive jolt, and then the plane yawed and rolled sharply as the loss of its vertical tail fatally compromised its air directional stability. As it careened into this extreme maneuver, aerodynamic forces ripped off both engines, and the plane began to plunge from the sky, corkscrewing down into the dark forest below. The pilots likely fought until the end, but there's nothing they could do. About 2 minutes after the collision, DHL Flight 611 plowed nose first into a forest outside the village of, is that pronounced Teisendorf? Instantly killing both crew members. Of course, the pilots being the crew members. At the same time, local residences in, what the fuck did I just try to say? Residences? That's a word. At the same time, local residents in the town of Uberlingen and neighboring villages heard an explosion in the sky and looked up to see burning pieces of the shattered cupola raining down over an area encompassing more than 200 square kilometers. Let's see what that is. 77 square miles. Okay. A dinner party near Uberlingen, is that how it's pronounced? Was interrupted when the flaming remains of the center section at right wing crashed down in the hostess's rear garden. Nearby, the tail section slammed into a road and the field in front of a boarding school for disabled children. And about 300 meters, okay, I know for a fact that's 600 feet, and about 300 meters away, the severed cockpit fell to earth in an apple orchard. Other pieces of debris from both planes, the remains of the left wing of the Tupolev, sections of the fuselage ceiling, again from the Tupolev, landing gear fairing, again the Tupolev, the tip of the 757 stabilizer, fell like hail across a zone of approximately 20 kilometers long, which is probably 7 miles. Yeah, 7 miles. Okay. And here's a map of all the debris. So here's the 757 wreckage and the Tu 154 wreckage. as witnesses rushed outside, already struck with terror by the sight of the burning plane falling from 35,000 feet. They came across something even more horrible. The bodies of, oh my god, dozens of children strewn for kilometers over streets, fields, and forests. The headmaster of the boarding school emerged to find about 20 dead children on his property. Others found bodies in their yards, on the streets in front of their houses, and scattered in the fields around the shattered remnants of the fuselage. No one among them had survived the fall. In fact, investigators later determined that 40 of the 69 passengers and crew aboard the Tupolev were ejected from the plane before it hit the ground. Oh my god, that is horrifying. This was a sight which would stay forever with those who witnessed it. I I can imagine the horror of a plane crash is bad enough when the victims are adults. But to be faced with such carnage wrought upon children is an experience which simply cannot be described. And here is the wreckage of the tail of the Tu-154. That is so horrifying. As dawn broke over Lake Hong, oh wait, hang on. Within about 15 to 20 minutes. Um, hang on. Okay. Within about 15 to 20 minutes of the crash, a witness contacted Germany's Federal Bureau of Aircraft Accident Investigation, or BFU, reporting a collision of two planes over Uberlingen. Upon confirming the crash had indeed taken place, the BFU launched one of the most significant investigations in the history of modern German aviation. As dawn broke over Lake Constance, investigators were already on the scene, confronting a vast crash site unlike anything they had previously encountered. Thousands of people went to cordon off the area, locate wreckage, and recover human remains. Um, it would ultimately take several days to find all the bodies, confirming a grim, self-evident truth that none of the 71 people on board the two planes had survived. Among the dead were one Breton and one Canadian, the DHL pilots, as well as four Belarusians and 65 Russians, and 48 of them were children. I need some water. In the city of Ufa, home to most of the dead, the population was left in a state of shock. In addition to the intelligent artists and athletes, several of the victims were the children of high-ranking officials in Bashkortostan, including members of the administration of the President of the Republic. Local authorities declared a period of mourning. Businesses shut their doors, festivals were cancelled, and radio stations played only sad classical music. Why do you? Okay, whatever. Um, one restaurateur who tried to put on a pop song was nearly run out of town, so intense was the city's collective grief. And here's a reconstruction of the exact configuration in which the planes came together. Meanwhile, by examining the wreckage, BFU investigators were able to conclude that the planes collided at an angle close to 90 degrees and that the tail of the 757 excuse me, sliced, um, sliced, well, sliced through the fuselage and the left wing of the tube from underneath. By the way, these are the landing gear bearings right here. The Tu-154 subsequently broke up in flight, while the 757 lost control and crashed nearby. But the mystery only deepened. Um, how could two relatively new airplanes, both equipped with the latest uh, traffic control, what the hell? Both equipped with the latest traffic collision avoidance systems, collide in the tightly controlled airspace of Central Europe? Western media, apparently citing the Swiss Air Traffic Control Agency, suggested that the Russian pilots had failed to follow the controller's instruction to descend. Russian authorities lashed out at the reports, implying that the controller was at fault for telling them to descend in the first place. It was only several days later that Swiss authorities admitted that controller Peter Nielsen had only warned the Tupolev crew 50 seconds before the collision, and they appear to have complied within a relatively short period. Here's the Tupolev forward fuselage section, lies crumpled in an order. And over here somewhere is, I believe, the cockpit. Anyways, the answers to the mystery lay in the plane's black boxes, which recorded the critical conversations on both flight decks in the minutes leading up to the collision. The BFU noted that both flight recorders on the 757 cut out 9 seconds after it hit the tubeless, when the engine separated from the wings, leading to a loss of power. Because the engines provide power for the electrical systems on the plane. The tubeless flight data recorder also ceased operations 3 seconds after the collision when the fuselage broke in two. But investigators were horrified to discover that the cockpit voice recorder, mounted in the cockpits and powered by a backup battery, continued to record for, oh my god, a further 2 minutes as the severed cockpit plunged towards the ground. Okay, the disturbing final contents aside, the black box has revealed the fundamental misunderstandings which led to the crash. Unaware that TCAS was about to issue a resolution advisory, Peter Nielsen ordered the Russian crew to descend, while TCAS simultaneously told them to climb and instructed the 757 to descend. The Russian crew, faced with the choice between the controller and the TCAS, chose to obey the controller and descended directly into the path of the 757. This raised three primary questions. Could either crew still have prevented the collision? Why did the Russian crew choose not to obey their TCAS? And why did the controller allow the situation to become so critical before intervening? And here's an aerial view of the forward fuselage with the cockpit right there and the passenger cabin. To answer the first question, investigators carried out a second by second analysis of the last minute of the two flights, from the time the crews became aware of the conflict up until the moment of the collision. And should be noted that both aircraft were operating on the same radio frequency, and in theory could have heard every relevant ATC communication communication. But a series of timing coincidences prevented either crew from realizing what was taking place. Captain Phillips on the 757 might have heard Nielsen's order for Tupelo to descend had it not come at exactly the same moment as his own TCAS resolution advisory, which obviously commanded greater attention. First Officer Campione wasn't in the cockpit at the time and could not have heard it either. The same thing happened all over again during the controller's second order for the Tupelo to descend, which corresponded temporarily with the order from the which corresponded temporarily with the order from Phillips on TCAS to increase descent. In this dynamic environment, Phillips' brain would have prioritized the more immediate command from the TCAS before considering the overall situation, which is actually a good thing, as much as it might have led to a collision. And again, Campione hadn't put his headset back on yet and couldn't have heard the transmission. Subsequently, the 757 crew waited 23 seconds to inform air traffic control that they were in a TCAS descent, a delay which some felt was inappropriately long. But it seemed that Ship Captain Phillips was primarily concerned with achieving the required rate of descent, and First Officer Campione was neither in his seat nor wearing his headset until shortly before the transmission was in fact issued. The coincidental fact that Campione decided to go to the bathroom right before the TCAS came to life evidently contributed to the lateness of the message. And in fact, had he been in the cockpit throughout the event, he might have been able to inform Nielsen in time to avert the collision. But that this did not happen could only be put down to random chance. One of the 757's engines came to rest in this cornfield, totally flattened by the force of the impact. Although Nielsen didn't hear the 757's TCAS descent call, it was recorded on the CVR to Tupelo, and yet none of her crew members reacted either. Investigators theorize and amid this animated conversations and high stress levels in the Tupelo cockpit, the pilots simply didn't hear it. This was the only communication which occurred between the ATC and the 757 during the entire time the Tupolev was in Zurich airspace. Hence why there was no other opportunity for the crew to hear what the 757 was doing. The BFU also noted that a misleading cue from the controller could have convinced the crew that descending was indeed the only way to avoid the collision. When Nielsen reported that the crossing traffic was at flight level 360, that is 36,000 feet, it was actually it was actually passing through 35,600 feet and descending rapidly. By placing it at 36,000 feet, he put it above the Tupelo, which had already begun its own descent a few seconds earlier, when it was actually slightly below. This discrepancy occurred because Nielsen's radar display only updated once every 12 seconds, and it was still showing the 757 at 35,900 feet when he issued the transmission, rendering him unaware that it was descending. An aerial view of the Tu-154's tail section. Based on statements made on both cockpit voice recorders, It appeared that both crew members were able to visually locate the other aircraft from an early stage, and in the case of the Tupolev, this occurred even before the resolution advisory was issued. The blinking anti-collision lights against the moonless sky were in fact quite easy to see, even from a great distance, but judging the relative height of the planes and their future trajectories under such conditions was completely impossible. The brain relies on points of reference to determine an object's relative motion, but the conditions that night presented none. Only in the last few seconds before the collision could the planes have been large enough in the field of view for their respective crews to have understood their relative position. Consequently, both crews did take evasive actions about 2 or 3 seconds before impact, but by then it was too late for their inputs to take effect, and the Tupolev's tail came to rest across the rural road. Considering these facts, it cannot be said that either crew was in a good position to avoid either plane, either by visually anticipating a collision or by understanding the situation through overhead ATC communication or overheard ATC communication. The more important question, therefore, was why the two pilots chose to obey ATC over their TCAS. Excuse me. In fact, this decision was deeply rooted in both the history of TCAS and the unique circumstances in the uh, blah, of aviation in Russia. It was a decision born not of faulty judgment, but of a fundamental cultural misunderstanding between the Russian crew and the Western engineers and regulators who designed the TCAS and the mandated its use. Although traffic collision avoidance systems had been required by the United States since 1993 and the European Union and the Middle East since 2000, the I lost my place. Hang on. Okay, I'm right here. Although traffic collision avoidance systems have been required in the United States since 1993 and in the European Union and the Middle East since 2000, at the time of the collision, they were not required in Russia. In fact, the only reason the accident Tu-154 even had a TCAS was so that it could fly to destinations in Europe. After all, back home in Russia, where most traffic wasn't equipped with the system, it would have been of little use. Training on the system was therefore quite sparse. Quite sparse. Bashkirian Airlines didn't have access to its T-154 simulator equipped with TCAS, and it's not clear such a thing even existed. In the absence of an appropriately outfitted simulator, the pilots um, only received theoretical training on TCAS, followed by a brief demonstration of the system in a plane parked on the ground. Therefore, the pilots gained minimal TCAS experience in the line of duty because they rarely flew to Europe. Uh, in fact, so far in 2002, the two captains put together had a mere 16 flights into airspace where TCAS was active. They almost never certainly encountered so much as a TCAS traffic alert, let alone a full-on resolution visor. And this would have been their first time responding to one, either in training or in real life. And this is the crash site of the 757. I'm just looking here. Okay. In addition to their unfamiliarity with the system, the airline's Tier 154 operating manual contained the language which contradicted that used by the manufacturer and undermined the very purpose of TCAS. And it was conceived in America. America. TCAS is the last line of defense and surefire way to prevent a collision, with the principles of air traffic control and see and avoid should prove inadequate. And such, there is no circumstances under which a TCAS resolution advisory should be disregarded, as its very activation implies that other means of collision avoidance have already failed. In fact, guidance issued by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration explicitly stated that a TCAS resolution advisory arrives even in order from air traffic control, like I said earlier in the video and the stream. But most everywhere else, the rules are nowhere near as clear cut. Official guidance from the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, that's literally how it's pronounced as ICAO, which signatory nations use to create their own regulations, did not say what to do if TCAS and ATC issued conflicting instructions. Similarly, European regulations have failed in this scenario. What is this? Oh, okay. But in Russia, regulations not only lack clarity, but appear to directly contradict those suggested by ICAO. Notably, the Bashkirian Airlines Tu-154 operating manual said the following: for the avoidance of in-flight collisions, the visual control of the situation in the airspace by the crew and the correct execution of all instructions issued by ATC is to be regarded as the most important tool. TCAS is an additional instrument which ensures a timely determination of oncoming traffic, the classification of the risk, and if necessary, planning of an advice for vertical avoidance maneuver. And after minimizing the importance of TCAS as a last line of defense, the manual went on to say, the ATC service is to be the basic system for collision avoidance. Nevertheless, in case of no link with ATC, the TCAS will help the crew avoid a collision, implying that TCAS only needs to be followed in the absence of input from ATC. This advice was in line with the policies that existed under the Soviet Union, where controllers wielded a level of absolute authority that they never held in the West, but it did not correspond well to modern principles of traffic separation. And here's the damage to the 757's tail, which struck the Tupolev. In practice, the idea that anything can override a TCAS resolution advisory defeats the purpose of the system, which is to prevent a collision after all other means of safe separation are exhausted. But the pilots of the Tu-154 certainly never considered it this way, and in their minds there would have been a little ambiguity as to the presence of Nielsen's command to descend over the TCAS instruction to climb. This logic would have fallen apart had they recalled that TCAS would send an opposite instruction to the other plane, but their experience with the system was so limited that they probably forgot. First Officer Ikulov repeatedly called attention to the TCAS order to climb. They have remembered this fact, but he never clearly articulated it, and no one listened to him anyway. Yeah. All right. It is also worth noting that the ATC order, unlike the TCAS resolution advisory, corresponds to the pilot's conception. Hmm, That what? It is also worth noting that the ATC order, unlike the TCAS resolution advisory, corresponded to the pilot's conception of the way traffic conflicts are typically resolved in Russia. On the airplane on the left is expected to give way under Western right-of-way rules. Russian rules hold that both planes must change course, while if the plane on the left, the 757 climbing, while the plane on the left, the Tupolev descends. In the TCAS environment, right-of-way is not very meaningful, but for those, but for these pilots, it would have been the acting principle during 95% of their careers, and it would have reinforced the apparent correctness of Nielsen's order. One of the Tupolev's wings came to rest in front of this house. It was now apparent why the Tupolev pilots made their decision, and that this decision was entirely in line with their training. The largest remaining question, then, was why Peter Nielsen allows the situation to escalate to the point of TCAS becoming involved in the first place. The roots of Nielsen's predicament go back to the very structure of the Swiss air traffic control system. Oh my god, this is a long article. I'm an hour and 11 minutes into, or well, now an hour and 12 minutes into the recording, and an hour and 13 minutes into the stream. Um, For most of history, Swiss's air traffic control services were run by the state. But in 2001, this service was privatized, becoming an independent company known as SkyGuide. Fitting name. Although the government still owned 99% of the shares in SkyGuide, it did not receive government funding and was expected to support itself financially through contracts. This reorganization came at a time when air traffic controllers were in high demand across Europe due to an estimated 12% continent-wide shortfall in ATC personnel. Consequently, in the year before the accident, the number of controllers on duty in Zurich during the night shift was reduced from 3 to 2. Back when controllers, or back when 3 controllers were present, it had become common practice for one controller to take an extended break during the middle of the night. This habit was not officially sanctioned, but had been tolerated by management for years. But, but when the standard night shift roster was reduced to 2 controllers, this practice continued, even though it just left just one controller on duty through the middle of the night shift. This violated SkyGuide rules, which required separate controllers to work the approach and output sectors, but given that all nearby airports were closed to landing traffic by 2300 or 11 o'clock local time, 11 p.m. local time. No one seemed to think that it would be a big problem. There wasn't a dedicated approach controller during this time. Part of the center fuselage section also fell near the same house. Most of the time, the workload at night was low enough that one controller could handle it without difficulty, and Peter Nielsen had become accustomed to this arrangement. but the addition of the maintenance work significantly reduced or increased his workload. By disabling systems that were normally system with his duties. In combination with the unexpected arrival of the airloid flight to Friedrichshafen, this directly contributed to the accident. Under normal circumstances, it would have been easy enough for Nielsen to call the Friedrichshafen Tower to hand over control of the airloid flight, then return his attention to the upper sector. But with the direct phone lines down, he and his assistants had to search for alternative means of communication, and this occupied his attention for the first 3 out of the 5 minutes leading up to the collision. However, calling the approach controller, who was likely asleep in another part of the building, would have been even less efficient. Excuse me. It also cannot be ignored that the optical short-term conflict alert, which would normally have drawn his attention to the developing situation, was not working due to the disconnection of the main computer. And on top of this, the fact that the planes would cross paths in between scheduled waypoints meant that it was not obvious that the flight planes would conflict until the planes began to visibly converge on radar. There's another view of the Tu-154 tail section, and with that I will be right back. Ash, you can edit this out if you want to. Okay, I have returned. Alright, where was I? Oh yeah, it's right here. Okay. By the time Nielsen noticed the conflict, the planes are armoring closer together than the minimum allowed by regulation. And even if he had successfully averted the collision at that moment, the inspector alone meant that there would have been an investigation. At this point, he decided to contact the plane to which he had spoken most recently, which was the Tupolev. And because his flight plan showed it was scheduled to do so anyway, he chose to instruct him to descend. Then spur of the moment decision, or these spur of the moment decisions planted in scenes of disaster. But Nielsen had no way of predicting the confusion his order would cause. The TCAS resolution advisories had not yet been issued, nor could he have been aware that they would be issued less than 1 second after the end of his transmission. Although controllers are prohibited um, although controllers are prohibited from issuing instructions which contradict the TCAS resolution advisory, then pilots must tell the controller about this advisory before this rule is applicable, and neither crew did so until much later. The 757's other engine came to rest in a different field. Once the T-154 crew had acknowledged his instructions to descend, Nielsen believed that the conflict was resolved. Um, if he had watched the radar screen a few seconds longer, he would have noticed the 757 begin to descend as well. But before he could do so, the airloid flight called him again. He spent the next 30 seconds or so telling or informing display how to contact readership and without an official control handover having taken place. Around this time, or around the time that this conversation began, an oral alert sounded in the control center, calling out conflict, to warn that the distance between the two planes was less than 6.5 nautical miles. However, no one present in the room could recall hearing the alarm. Even if Nielsen had noticed it, he would have disregarded it, believing that he had already put the planes on course to correct the situation. Almost concurrently with these events, the 757's first officer called to report that they were in a TCAS descent. But because he was in a different workstation talking to a different plane, Nielsen didn't hear the transmission. At that point, disaster became all but inevitable. In fact, by the time Nielsen next turned his attention back to the upper sector, the collision had already taken place. Just 50 seconds had passed since his first instruction to the Tupolev. The tail section partially burned over before the, the tail section partially burned over both before and after impact. So what they mean is it was on fire after the collision, and then all again after on and so it was on fire first after the collision, and then next after the tail section hit the ground. One final chance in preventing collision was also followed by the maintenance work. Heartbreakingly, controllers in neighboring Karlsruhe saw the collision coming, but they did not have the authority to speak planes in another sector without permission from the responsible controller. The Karlsruhe controllers tried several times to call Nielsen in the minute before the crash, but the landlines were down and they couldn't get through. By the time they gave up on this effort, it was too late to prevent the crash even by breaking the rules. The controllers were forced to watch, helpless, as the two planes collided and then disappeared from radar, knowing that dozens of people were dying before their eyes, and that there was nothing they could do to save them. That is, wow, that's heavy. The Tupolev severed left wing landed in yet another field. Having already absolved the two crews of blame, the BFU was forced to conclude that Nielsen didn't hold any personal responsibility for the disaster either. Every decision he made was relatively sensible under the circumstances, with the exception of his mistake. With the exception of his mistaken report that says 757 was at the Tupolev's 2 o'clock position. However, that slip-up did not contribute to the accident, since the Tu-154 crew already had the 757 in sight. In the end, systemic deficiencies and the Zurich Control Center prevented Nielsen from doing his job safely, and more or less led directly to the disaster. Skyguide had come to tolerate single controller operations without conducting any risk assessments, believing that the practice was common throughout Europe. Skyguide also did not possess or assess the potential risks involved in the maintenance work, and then failed to inform controllers of the work's potential side effects. This was, it was this apparent lack of interest in safety which created the circumstances for the accident to occur. That night, Nielsen was doing the work or jobs of three people: supervisor, upper sector controller, and approach controller, with inadequate information on multiple inoperative systems. Such a situation should never be allowed to develop, and Skyguide ultimately bore responsibility for the fact that it did. This is a diagram of a near collision, by the way. In its final report on the accident, the BFU painted a picture of a series of wild coincidences which, in the presence of systemic deficiencies, led to disaster. But to come away from the report believing that the Uberlingen collision was a one-off would be incorrect. In fact, the lack of clarity in many parts of the world about the relative authority relative authority of an ATC order and a TCAS resolution advisory were already known to the industry. In January 2001, this very same loophole nearly led to what would have been the worst air disaster of all time. A Japan Airlines Boeing 747 with 427 people on board climbed towards 39,000 feet after takeoff from Tokyo, or as a Japan Airlines Boeing 747, with 427 people on board, climbed towards 39,000 feet, and didn't confront Tokyo. An overwhelmed trainee controller allowed it to embark on a collision course with another Japan Airlines flight, a DC-10 carrying 250 passengers and crew. As the planes drew near each other, the controller instructed the 747 to descend, but 3 seconds later its TCAS instructed it to climb. Trusting the controller over the automated system, the pilots of the 757 put their plane into descent, unaware that the DC-10, having received a TCAS advisory to descend, was doing the same. Amid the confusion, the training controller's supervisor attempted to order the 747 to climb, but her transmission was lost in the chaos of the moment. As the two planes descended directly toward each other, the crew of the 747 suddenly caught sight of the DC-10 and executed a last-second evasive maneuver, pitching steeply downwards in a desperate effort to avoid a collision. Seconds later, the 747 passed underneath the or passed just um, seconds later, the 747 passed just 135 meters underneath the DC-10, avoiding disaster, but only by the narrowest of margins. 443 feet. Holy crap! The drink cart was, or this drink cart was thrown into the 747's attic during the avoidance maneuver. Wow, that is okay. This invasive maneuver was so abrupt that flight attendants, passengers, and loose objects were thrown into the ceiling, only to crash down again 2 seconds later. This violent change in direction uh, injured 100 people, 9 of them seriously, including a woman who suffered a broken leg. Damage to the cabin interior, particularly the ceiling, was extensive. Most notably, drinks cart, shown above, was thrown into the cabin ceiling and into the attic behind the first class lounge, uh, where it remained for the rest of the flight. In the end, the 747 returned safely to Tokyo, and the injured passengers were released for medical treatment, many of them unaware that they had come frighteningly close to death. Within a short time after the near miss, it became apparent that one plane had obeyed its TCAS while the other followed a conflicting instruction from ATC. The potential danger of this type of misunderstanding should have been plainly apparent, but by the time of the Uberlingen disaster 17 months later, nothing had fundamentally changed. Part of the problem was that the system by which such changes make their way around the world is very slow moving. Japanese investigators went in pan to issued recommendation to the International Civil Aviation Organization. ICAO would have then have had to adopt a new guidance. This guidance would have had to have been propagated to signatory nations. Those nations would have had to agree to adopt the new wording into their own regulatory systems, and then the new concept would have had to be passed on to pilots from recurrent training. Even if ICAO had immediately begun proceedings to clarify the relative precedence of CCAS resolution advisories and ATC communications or commands, either way, which it does not seem they did, it's not clear that the changes would have reached the batch carrying airlines group in time to avoid a collision or prevent the accident. I mean, either one works, right? This is especially true considering that Russia's TCAS related regulations already diverged even from the original flawed ICAO guidance, suggesting that bringing Russian rules into compliance would be quite difficult. On the other hand, and two Japanese airliners actually collided, almost surely resulting in the deaths of an unprecedented 677 people, it's quite likely that no one would ever make the same mistake again, even if ICAO did nothing. In this way, it becomes apparent how fatal accidents command much swifter changes than the near misses, even in the absence of any conscious decision by regulators to treat them as such. Part of the Tu-154's landing gear fairing, which was ripped off during the collision. In the years since the disaster over Uberlingen, prescribed responses to TCAS resolution advisories have been standardized around the world. Systems have been introduced which can alert controllers directly whenever a resolution advisory is issued to an aircraft, and TCAS is now capable of reversing its commands if one aircraft does not comply. Um, Thanks to these changes, it's unlikely that a similar accident will happen again. And 20 years later, the Uberlingen disaster remains the only major mid-air collision involving two planes with properly operating traffic collision avoidance systems. On the legal side, fault for the accident was officially placed on Skyguide, and several Skyguide officials were charged with manslaughter. I forgot about that, actually, although they were found guilty. Um, no Sky left, although they were found guilty. No real punishment was handed down. Three Skyguide managers who tolerate rules violations were given suspended prison sentences, while a fourth was ordered to pay a small fine, a judgment widely considered inadequate. However, the company itself was forced to pay compensation to the victims and take actors left and take corrective actions to improve its safety culture, and has managed to share space without an incident ever since. As a vase of white flowers in memory of the victims permanently launches over the workstation where Peter Nielsen once sat, forever reminding controllers of their responsibility to the public. And the story of the Uberlingen disaster should have ended there, with necessary changes having been made to ensure the safety of future air travelers. But, in fact, one tragic twist remained in store. Vitaly Koloyev at the memorial to his wife and kids. Vitaly Koloyev, the Russian architect, was waiting for his family in the airport in Barcelona when he received the unimaginable news. Their plane had crashed, and there were no survivors. Um, Stunned by the loss of his wife and two kids. Um, Stunned by the loss of his wife and two young children, Kaloyev immediately traveled to Germany, where he arrived in Uberlingen the day after the accident. Consumed by grief, he joined the search for the remains of his 4-year-old daughter Diana, against recommendations of authorities. By some stroke of luck, her body was found intact, lying on the forest floor beside the pearl necklace Kaloyev had given to her. She was the youngest of the 71 victims, not old enough even to begin school. It seemed beyond cruel that she should lie dead in a forest in Germany while her bereaved father wept over her lifeless body. Vitaly Koloyev, right, confronts the CEO of Skyguide, left. I don't know which of these two is the Skyguide CEO. Anyways, Koloyev subsequently returned to his native um, Vladikavkaz, where he buried his wife and children side by side and erected a sprawling shrine to their memory. It is never easy to move on from such a profound grief. And I can confirm this. I had a puppy die when I was 10 years old, and it hit me hard. I still think about her sometimes. Anyways, Bakalia found it especially difficult. He can be found lingering by the memorial at any time of day and in any weather for months on end. He barely slept right, and how could he? Everything which gave his life meaning had been taken away. As the events of the crash, as the events which led to the crash started to become clear, Kalia became fixated on a singular goal: to convince Skyguide to apologize for his role in the accident. He attended gatherings of victims' relatives and press conferences in Germany, where he confronted Skyguide officials and demanded that they apologize. But Skyguide, embroiled in lawsuits um, over the accident, had instructed its spokespeople not to admit any fault until a verdict had been handed down. Instead, the company offered him a total of 160,000 Swiss francs in compensation for his loss, on the condition that he refrained from any lawsuits. This is standard procedure in the West, and Europeans and Americans tend to respond to the practice by rolling their eyes. I'm sorry, I should be laughing, but this sentence is hilarious. Muttering obscenities about the company in question, and then suing to increase the payout. Um, but in the cultures of the North Caucasus, there is an expectation that such a high stakes dispute will end with either an admission of guilt and a request for forgiveness, or justified revenge by the injured party. Not only would a failure to apologize be considered a damnable provocation, but the failure of the Indian party to respond proportionately would be considered a dereliction of his duty as a man. Vitaly Kalyev and his family's fate. Kalyev soon changed course and asked instead if it would be impossible to meet with Peter Nielsen to speak with him and convince him to apologize instead. But this too was denied. Nielsen was in no fit state to speak to the unstable relative of the Uberlingen victim. And so, Kalyev drifted back and forth between Germany and Vladikavkaz, growing progressively angry and some legal proceedings dragged on without any conclusion. Many in Russia felt that the slow pace of justice amounted to a cover-up, and Kalyev agreed. This was another cultural misunderstanding. In Russia, following an accident, everyone involved is usually arrested immediately and then released if they are not found at fault. In contrast, Western nations don't typically arrest aviation professionals for making mistakes, unless gross negligence can be demonstrated, and company officials will only be charged after a lengthy investigation. Cullingham, however, had no patience for this lenient approach, and in late 2003 or early 2004, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Um, Having hired a private investigator to find Peter Nielsen's address, Kalyev, 8 inches. Okay. Kalyev um, arrived in Zurich in February 2004 and checked into a hotel. Oh, by the way, an undated photo of a young Peter Nielsen. Um, Having hired a private investigator to find Peter Nielsen's address, Kalyev arrived in Zurich in February 2004 and checked into a hotel. A few days later, on the 24th of February, he traveled to Nielsen's house armed with a 22 centimeter jackknife, which is 8 inches, okay, 8.5 inches, and photographs of his dead family members. Initially, Kalyev sat down in Nielsen's garden. Excuse me. Um, Kalyev sat down in Nielsen's garden, seemingly unsure what to do. When Nielsen eventually emerged in Beijing, he did not respond kindly to the presence of Kalyev on his property. Nielsen had been affected deeply by the crash, to the point where he required medical treatment for acute PTSD, and this unexpected visitation only rubbed salt on his wounds. A brief unfriendly conversation ensued. Kalyev then got up in Nielsen's face and showed him the photos of the bodies of his children and backed into a corner. Nielsen pushed them aside. It was at that moment that Kalyev apparently snapped. Blinded by rage, he stabbed Nielsen several times in the chest, mortally wounding him. Sorry about that. Um, he then ran away down the street, blood still dripping from his reddened hands, as Nielsen died in the arms of his family. The following day, police arrested Kalyev in his hotel room and charged him with premeditated killing. Public reactions to the revelation of the murder varied significantly. Europeans were largely outraged, while the response within Russia was much more mixed. 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 Many people, while denouncing the murder, nevertheless sympathize with Kaliyev's plight. A significant minority outright endorsed the killing, which drew heated condemnation from the other side, including from another man who lost his entire family in the crash, who said he could see no justification for Kaliyev's action. Vitaly Kaliyev speaks to reporters after his release from prison. In court, Kaliyev initially denied intending to kill Nielsen, but could not explain why he had brought a knife and his only goal was to talk. Later, he expressed no remorse for the murder, which he considered to be justified under his North Caucasus code of honor. In the end, a Swiss court, considering the mitigating circumstances, sentenced him to 8 years for manslaughter. Um, Even this relatively light sentence was seen by many Russians as too harsh. Wow. Okay. Um, and the governments have begun to put pressure on its Swiss counterpart, excuse me, to reduce the punishment. Switzerland have ultimately caved under the pressure, and Kalayan was released from prison without a clear explanation in 2007, having served only 2 years out of his 8 year sentence. Large crowd of reporters and well wishers welcomed Kalayan back home to Vladikavkaz. Kalayev returned to home to a triumphant welcome when he was ushered off the plane by um, an adoring crowd of Vladikavkaz residents and members of the pro-Putin youth group Nashi. I'm not gonna say what that. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave that as it is. Although Russians overall were split on whether he was a hero or a criminal, his home province did not hesitate to pull out all the stops to celebrate his release. People cheered for him in the streets and stores refusing to take his money when he shopped for groceries. Journalists selected him as Vladikavkaz's Man of 2007. The leader of North Ossetia Alania Group appointed him Deputy Construction Minister for the Autonomous Republic. I don't really take offense at people who call me a murderer, Aliyev told the Los Angeles Times upon his return. People who say that or people who say that would betray their own children, their own motherland. I protected the honor of my children and the memory of my children. Victims' family members gather around the Tupolev tail after the crash. Right. All of this fanfare ignored the fact that Nielsen was never found in fault in the accident in the first place. As Russian nationalists hail Kaliev as a hero for carrying out justice on behalf of the victims, few could explain what Nielsen had actually done wrong, besides issuing a relatively late warning to the Tupolev crew. The way this particular segment of Russian society reacted to the crash and the murder was an ugly reflection of a national tendency to blame whoever happened to be present at the moment of a tragedy, while those responsible for creating this unsafe condition go unarmed and unpunished. No doubt buoyed by his less celebrity status, Kaliev eventually recovered from his crippling grief, remarried, and had two more children, who were both 3 years old as of this writing. When was this article written? Uh, a year ago. So they would probably be about four now. No doubt. Okay. He retired from his post as deputy construction minister in 2016, but he continues to live a fairly comfortable life in Vladikavkaz. In contrast, Nielsen's family, hurt beyond words by Kalyev's callous and misguided revenge, returned home to their native Denmark and retreated from the public eye. A memorial near the crash site evokes the pearl necklace, which belonged to Diana Kolyeva. In the end, the Uberlingen disaster was not the result of one man's split-second decision, but the inevitable product of a deficient system, of an air traffic control company which paid little or too little attention to safety, and of international and national level regulators who were too slow to correct the glaring flaw in the rules which keep airplanes apart. It is also a reminder that cultural norms play as much of a role in aviation safety as they do in our perception of justice. As the two planes sped toward each other that night, a sequence of events took place in which eight people in three different locations all tried to avert disaster as best they could, only for their divergent expectations to steer them inexorably into the jaws of catastrophe. And as so often seems to happen, the most innocent among us paid the price, leaving in their wake a trail of broken dreams and broken families. Shedding more blood did not and cannot make those dreams whole again. They have vanished with the children of Yufa, like so many tears in the rain. Holy crap, I have been talking for nearly 2 hours. Anyways, that's the. Oh, actually. Huh, I might look at this guy's. Yeah, I might look at this guy's, other content. Anyways, yeah, that's a strange but true story of the Uberlingen midair collision. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please make sure you drop a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on your bell notifications. Let me know down in the comments what you think. And if you have watched this far, a massive, massive thank you to you. And I'll see you guys in the next YouTube video. Bye bye. Holy shit. Okay, I need to go use the bathroom. I will be right back.